Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Gaia Thrift in downtown Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you're watching on, and they will appear here in my chat room, and I can speak with you directly. And today, our subject is the weekly roundup of interesting stories. And I do have an interesting story today. And we will talk about that, and who knows where else our conversation will lead. And hello to Arlene in the chat room. It's good to see you, Arlene. My story for today is about the discovery of, I guess we'd say, a new state of life. I think that's what they're calling it. And they're calling it specifically the third state of life. The first one is life, the second, or living, the second one is death, and the third one is the third one. And what they're saying is that they've recently discovered that certain cells, after the death of the body, continue to live and take on new functions. And this is a very fascinating discovery. I'm not really sure what it means. I don't think it has anything to do with ideas of the afterlife, but it could be very interesting in terms of medicine. And they talked about how these cells could be used to deliver certain treatments while getting around the body's immune defenses, which would be a bit of a step forward. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. I'm personally a great believer in science. A lot of pagans that I know historically in the last 40 odd years have been what are sometimes called Luddites. They reject technology of all sorts. I'm not one of those. I perhaps don't always embrace it as well as I should, but for the most part, I'm a believer in technology and moving forward with technology. Does it bring some problems? Yes, it does. But when do we not have problems? One of the things people are talking about recently that I have seen, I guess we can call them stories. I've seen memes on Facebook talking about how many of the foods we eat today did not exist 100 years ago. Many of the diseases we suffer from today did not exist 100 years ago, which on the surface is a bit of a compelling argument, except for one important thing. It's not true. 100 years ago, the vast majority of these diseases were already there. They were just being called something else, or they weren't being diagnosed at all. In some cases, they were just thought to be normal. When I was a child, I remember being told that virtually every old person will lose their memory. It's just part of aging. We now know that that is not inherently true, and many older people don't have that problem. Pardon me. One of the more interesting historical features in ancient Egypt in certain periods, the Egyptians believed that both men and women menstruated. Why? Because they could see it. Because after a certain age, men were in the habit of urinating blood, and they assumed this was the male version of menstruation. It was actually bilharziosis, which is a parasite that causes bleeding in the urine. They didn't know that. That disease certainly did exist, even though they did not know it was a disease. And Arlene says, I was just seeing about that third life and hadn't gotten to read it yet. It's very fascinating. I highly recommend it. I want to say hello to Black Crystal. Hello, Black Crystal. And I do have my chat room in front of me, but as I'm on my phone, it's rather small, so I have to look carefully. Cancer. Cancer seems to be everywhere today. And you can look back at the causes of death 100 years ago and think, oh, it was far less common, virtually not there at all. Except we know perfectly well that at that time, cancer was commonly called consumption. And in many cases, they did not recognize it as cancer. They diagnosed it as consumption, but it was still a very frequent issue. One of the things that's happened is that we have a lot more diagnoses today. We have a lot more understanding of disease today. It isn't that those diseases did not exist, it's that we didn't have words for them, and in some cases didn't even realize they were abnormal. And I think that we need to be, mindful of the way things change, the way knowledge increases, and not taken in by simplistic arguments. Another one I see a lot is about people who are sensitive to gluten in wheat. And this is a very interesting situation because it's been reported that people who have gluten sensitivity, if they go to Europe, they cease to experience it. It is something we saw a lot less of years ago, contrary to the examples I was just giving. And there is a strong theory that it's not really gluten that's causing the sensitivity at all, but glyphosate, which is used in farming, in insecticides and the like. And I find this, while not yet necessarily proven, certainly a pretty convincing argument, given the number of people who say that when they go to a different part of the world where that chemical is not used, they cease to experience these symptoms. And we're constantly developing new understandings of our world, which change the way we relate to it. And this third form of life could be a really big one. In fact, the entire study of cells and DNA and the like has drastically changed how we deal with many things. And I see this as a positive. We have a far better idea of how we are made now, thanks to DNA and genetic studies, and ways of developing responses to diseases we would never have had previously. And I think that I wouldn't go so far as to say that people are healthier now than they were 100 years ago. I think that depends on who you are and where you are. I think people in certain places are very, very much healthier than they were 100 years ago. I think there are parts of the world and also social classes where it's nothing for a person to live to be in their late 90s or even over 100 now. You read about it all the time. That was not true 100 years ago. And what changed was primarily people's access to medicine. That's one of the things that makes the current medical crises in the United States particularly sad, because access to medicine is such an important thing in people's lives. And to have no access to it or inferior access to it is really kind of tragic. And Mary says, that's a possibility. I definitely have symptoms if I consume too much gluten. And, for years, medical people were basically saying, oh, that's not possible. There's only this one, if you have celiac disease, then this might be true, but otherwise you're just imagining it. As American medical people do kind of love to say, you're just imagining it. But no, there are lots and lots of people experiencing this. And again, many of them have found if they go to Europe, they don't experience it anymore because glyphosate is not legal there. And food that's been treated with it is not legal And of course, I don't think anyone in the US is looking into this because that might um, curtail someone's profits. And, that really is itself very sad. I think when we look at things like this third state of life, and as I was saying, one of the things they talked about was using this type of cell